Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and hey, you can do this. Because what this is ConsoleLA. Now let's talk about that. In fact, let's talk about that so much that I'll take off the headphones for a moment. You might not know what this console is, but you will. This is my take on the Los Angeles sound in the 70s, the early 70s. And that's a big deal. Let me rattle off a bunch of names and things. Let's talk, oh, and by the way, this is Quad 8, but they're also very similar to Electrodyne, Sphere. There's a lot of research, and you can't necessarily get the information off of things like Wikipedia. You have to really grind through asking the people who were there at the time. And I know some of those people, although I haven't met them personally, but I know enough to dig into reconditioning these things and stuff. You can't get these anymore. The company lives. Quad 8 is alive. But it's not like you can go somewhere and be like, I want to buy one of these. How much is it? You can theoretically still get these somehow. So let's talk LA in early 70s. Let's talk Steely Dan. It's on the back cover of Countdown to Ecstasy. Frank Zappa. Oh, and these are also Wally Heider studios. There's the idea with the Quad 8 is that it was the 16-track LA studio. It's the first time there was a manufactured console that people could just buy and install. Before then, it was all custom stuff. So I mentioned Steely Dan, Frank Zappa. Let's talk early Eagles before they moved to Florida and were using MCIs. I've released Console MC. I'll show you a comparison between these two. Grateful Dead, how about? They were in LA or San Francisco, but these consoles were in San Francisco too. The Bakersfield period of the Grateful Dead sounds very Quad 8 to me. And some of the live stuff that they did, like Live Dead, and especially Europe 72. Europe 72, to my ear, screams Quad 8. Absolutely what's going on there. You got Neil Young, you've got Herbie Hancock. On the East Coast, Tom Scholz of Boston. And you've heard things like More Than a Feeling, all of that. He apparently had a Quad 8 as well. There's a lot about these, and there's reasons why they didn't stick around. But this is also what a bunch of classic movies came off of, and there's just a lot going on. People at the time figured they were clearer than Neves. Part of this is because the buses on them, and I'm not talking about the audio bus, I'm talking about the voltage that the electronic parts ran on, was plus and minus 28 volts. It was a higher voltage console than most, so more dynamic range going on there. You got classic Joni Mitchell albums coming off of Quad 8s. You've got Supertramp. Fleetwood Mac's Rumors is said to come off of a Quad 8. These are really quite something. And part of the way they are is because they are extremely broad EQs. And the EQs are kind of tailored for what you might need if you were making a movie. Like if you were going, here is this recording and I need to make the thunder be a little bit louder in the distance of this wide-angle shot of a cornfield. They needed to make consoles that could do stuff like that. They weren't so much thinking about, can I cut a little notch in the kick drum for the bass to go in? That's not how these worked. So let's jump back in and do a little quick comparison with different things. I have this particular ConsoleLA, this particular imaginary Quad 8, set up to do a really bright and aggressive early 70s sound, and I can compare it directly with Console MC. So we've got a channel plug-in here. This is going to be the lead vocal. To fly. And then it's definitely on the bright qualities. Because one of the things that increasingly happened in the 70s was you started with very mid-rangey sounds, and then year by year people were using the same console but getting brighter and brighter. And that's one of the things that was happening to the sound of records in the 70s. Let's jump over to recent projects, Rise MC. By contrast, this one has the sweepable mid, but you couldn't really, this wasn't one where you could do what they did in the 70s of cutting the mids drastically so you're left with only highs and lows. So for this one, we've got a completely different tonality. And we can see that in this vocal, you've got a mid boost. But the mids aren't really doing the same thing. Whereas if we go to the early 70s sound of, I might just have to move that around a little bit in the video making. If we run with this, with the same vocal, it's painted full and fair. We've got the ability to throw lots of highs on there. But there is this particular sort of mid-range edgy sound going on. And since we are playing with the vocal track, painted full and fair, we can darken it right up like that. Life revealed unto thy or we can do a thing where you could sort of maximize the sonority of the mids by pushing that instead of pushing the highs. I had it as a really bright, shiny sound, but we can do this. Painted full and fair. Life revealed unto thy open eye. We can make the mid-range really honk because it's an extremely wide mid-range band, and the edges are very much extreme highs and extreme lows. And I think the best way to demonstrate that is to step away from the, we'll switch over to, for instance, drums. Check this out. As you can see, we have boosted highs and lows. As you can hear, it doesn't sound as if it's a hyper-inflated low end or anything. And that is characteristic of the 70s drum recordings, where they tended to sit back. Even when boosting the highs and lows, you tended to have drums that sat back that didn't sound as multi-mic'd and super up front as other recordings. If we drop it back to no boosting, it sounds pretty normal. Like we can bypass it. It's a little quieter, but it's not significantly different from what just the raw capture is. And then if we do something like boost the mids, clearly we have a solid mid-rangey sound, and that's something that we can use on things. But one of the things that happened in the 70s as we got increasingly into the mid-70s, and I hear this on the Zappa albums, where you'd start out with this sort of MIDI kind of sound. Also note that we can boost the bass, but what happens is you don't get quite the same thing as you would in the MCI. You get a different style of boost where it's filling in the extreme lows, but it's trying to sort of fill in earthquake frequencies, and it simply won't do quite the same effect as other consoles would do. However, this will do a low frequency sound that blends in with other sounds in an interesting and effective way. And of course we can boost the super highs a lot, to the point where we're boosting it so much that it kind of hurts. I have the fader quite high. I can pull it down, but using this type of sound, which is based on really broad frequencies where the cutoffs are kind of extended. With the Quad 8, the way you get that mid-70s sound is by cutting a bunch of mids and building everything out of the extremes and balancing it as such. Like we've got all extremes here, so we have a pretty wide range sound. I personally hear this sound most clearly in something like, if you know Zappa's One Size Fits All album, which I can't prove was done on the Quad 8s, but I'm hearing a similarity there, where if you start with on tracks like Inca Roads, for instance, where you have that wonderful guitar solo, and then that snare in there just basically takes the top of your head off. It's so bright. The cymbals are so shiny. They're so sparkly. And that's because it's leaning on these really broad boosts, but just pushing them to the nth degree. It's not the same sound as you had in, say, Apostrophe. It's not the same sound as you had in, say, Hot Rats. Hot Rats, you'd be getting a drum sound that might be a lot more mid-rangey. Whereas once you start moving into more of an Apostrophe sound, it's not going too wild. It's Ainsley Dunbar, so his drums sound great regardless, way better than mine. But you have this degree of mid-ranginess because it's just about the balance of what sits where. And then as you go over to something like One Size Fits All, we're just pushing it even farther. We're just pushing into that, we might be pulling the level back a little bit, balancing it with things. We're just pushing it even farther. We're balancing it with stuff. To get this 1970s mix, which could be either the late 70s with all the sparkliness going on, or more of your sort of early 70s, where more of that mid-range fits. And we could do the same thing with, for instance, this guitar. Here's what we're looking at with this guitar. We've got a certain amount of boosted lows, because this particular amp doesn't have much in the way of lows. And we've got a little added everything, really. If it was flat, it would sound like this. And that sounds more like just a cleanly recorded microphone, where the microphone is just delivering what's there. And that's consistent with what a Quad 8 is. The digital audio workstation is not bad at being able to give you that type of sound, because the digital audio workstation is the nearest analog to having a super high voltage on the voltage buses. Being able to deliver stuff like that. So if we're taking a sound like this and boosting the mid-range, we're bringing the mids forward without increasing the brightness. And we have to set it back because otherwise we're pushing it to be too hard. And that could be a really MIDI 1970s sound. Or we can start pushing the highs, and the boost is so high that it almost avoids that ratty sound that you don't want to get out of distorted guitars. We can get a certain clarity that doesn't just sound like transistory grunge, as long as we're not pushing too hard. You can get this real mid-70s glitter and edge on things. And again, it's about using this style of equalization. It's about using this equalization that was before you had lots of control over what you could do. It's not nearly so much about dialing in peaks and things like you could do with the MCI console that I did ConsoleMC about. This is about just balancing stuff and deciding what should sit in the highs, what should sit in the lows, how does this all balance together. And again, we've got the ability to bring in bass, but in this case, you're barely hearing any of that bass, certainly compared to having a bass guitar in there, because it's crossing over too low to really be able to push low mids in the bass that way. Although one thing we can do, which is interesting, these particular filters are not exactly normal filters for modern digital audio workstations, which are meant to be very controllable. These aren't so much. So if you do something like boost the highs, there you have boosted highs. We can take them away. But then if you pull the treble all the way back, it does a shift. It does a different thing. And there's a certain amount of mid-range punch that you can get out of this particular setup with these particular, you can't really call it circuitry because it's digital, but this is not working in the normal way. And if you learn how to get sounds out of these, well, there you go. And it's the similar thing with the bass. In order to get the bass to boost in the way that these consoles did, it has a bit of a combined dip. It's not the cleanest of cutoffs, and so you can tighten it up in such a way that it starts to give you a little bit more in the way of low mids. It doesn't just make it become less, instead it's focusing the bass in the lower mid-range. And there you have it. That's how this kind of thing is done. Let me show you another thing just briefly, a thing which I haven't actually touched in these project templates. These are sort of back and forths with me remixing this track because, Reaper quit unexpectedly. We're going to try opening it again. There we are. So something that I did while remixing this was remix the chorus, which has a triple harmony vocal, and kind of redesigned it around that mid-70s thing, because that's really where my heart lies. And in so doing, I took the track that was designed around the MCI, was designed around the ability to find a mid-range peak boost that was actually quite tight and dial in particular harmonics that I wanted to be a lot louder. That was always the deal with taking the MCI style ConsoleMC, was balancing the highs and lows, yeah, but the whole thing, it's maybe a little more distorted than the incredibly clean and clear Quad 8. And it was all about finding good things to do with those peaks. And so each harmony vocal got its own little peak and its own little balance in the bass. What ended up happening with the ConsoleLA was that those vocals started getting the mid-range sucked out of them just so that they would be louder, and the way that I got the emphasis on ConsoleLA with a 3-vocal harmony vocal, one low, one middle, and one high, was designed around like what the Eagles were doing with their sound, where their high vocal is very breathy and very high. Mine's fake, but you do what you can. The low vocal had its warmth, and the middle vocal was, of course, Glenn Frey, which typically was a rock and roll, loud, belted vocal, and it didn't really sit with the warm mid-range so much as that was where the energy came from. Glenn Frey had the ability to do that in a big, big way. And so my back and forth here, this would be console MC playing the chorus of this particular song with the 3 vocals.
Ask the dead of heart to walk and live.
Or it would be when I get to them. Hang on.
Ask too
Here we
much
are.
from for me. This isn't the side I wanted to see. My baby, you got to rise for me. This isn't the side I
So all of these
wanted to
vocals,
see. My baby, you got to rise for me. This isn't the side
there's your pop
I
vocal.
wanted to see. My baby, you got to rise for me. This isn't the side I wanted to see.
There you have it. That's the MCI style. That's the gear that the Eagles would be using on stuff like Hotel California. It's designed to have a rich, full sound that blends really well with the right emphasis on each voice
Baby, you got to rise
so that it would go together.
This isn't the side I wanted to see.
Now, when I moved over to ConsoleLA to redo this, everything changed. Let's see if this can open without crashing. Very good, very good. It did. And having done that, let's find the same place. And here's the ConsoleLA take on the same thing. Very bright. Right.
Baby, you got to rise for me. This isn't the side I wanted to see. My baby, you got to rise for me. This isn't the side I wanted to
There's
see.
our mid vocal.
My baby, you got to rise for me. This isn't the side I wanted to see. My baby, you got to rise for me. This
And the whole idea of that is pushing just the loudness, and it particularly jumps out in this other section, which is mean, nasty, aggressive sounding vocals.
to deny the only rightful governor of your affairs. Know him now, there's no one fairer. Shown by all he'll take away. Love's a trick and life's a terror. You have to say, this isn't the
Back into the
side
chorus.
I wanted to see. My baby, you got to rise for me. This isn't the side I wanted to see. My baby, you got to rise for me. This isn't the side I wanted to see. My baby, you got to rise for me.
With the solo. And we'll stop there. So I can't play you all of that song, not before I go through, recheck whether maybe things got too bright in my 70s chase there. And there you have it. That is ConsoleLA. It is a console that's perhaps one of your closer ones to what people can do with DAWs these days, but the entire approach to using ConsoleLA is strikingly different from how people go and approach recording these days. With this one, it's all about balancing stuff against each other, and it's all about balancing the general frequency areas rather than finding like this place to boost the heck out of the bass at this exact frequency. You're going to get a bunch of sounds where, in general, you can sculpt the frequencies to be whatever you want, up to and including really bright and sparkly and modernistical sounding. And a lot of bands did a bunch of that. Zappa was always very into pushing the highs. So if you listen critically to the albums that he put out across the 70s, you will end up hearing a whole bunch of treble boosty brightness and stuff. And Steely Dan increasingly got into getting brighter and brighter while keeping rigorous control over not going too far. And one way to do that with this, since it does have it has limitations as far as how far you can push the overall output So if stuff is bright and starts sounding nasty and crunchy, like some of this demonstration got really nasty at certain points, pull the track back. Have it be quieter and really bright, rather than just really bright and also really loud. Because one thing that happens with ConsoleLA is it's going to push you to mix that classic 70s kind of sound, because that's what's going to sound good. You'll get to balancing things with the right general frequency ranges leveled out. And rather than being able to shape a, 80s or 90s or 2000 style, very studio style, here is the kick drum, which has been contoured to within an inch of its life. Here is the bass drum, which I carved a neat little hole in for the kick, all of that kind of stuff. Instead, you will get that 70s quality of, this is just a natural bass guitar, maybe off of an amp, maybe not. Mine is C-Rick bass, so it's a pretend amp. And sounds and feels like it was a mic was just put up. But it translates. You sculpt it until the deep notes have enough volume, but they'll still sound way back there. They're going to sound like they're off at a distance coming out of an amp. You've just turned it up to the point where your low notes can't come out. Or you've turned the mid-range down so that the honky mid-range of the bass or the guitar that you didn't want to have there steps back and isn't overwhelming anymore. You get to do a bunch of shaping, but it's in this very restricted way. And that's actually its own kind of advantage, because it means that you'll arrive at results quicker. I say this having also said that Steely Dan liked using this console, and certainly it was on the cover of Countdown to Ecstasy, but I think I hear it across a lot of their stuff, because you couldn't really do that much better. Remember, this is an era and a time when the people who were working in LA thought Neve was a downgrade from these. And the trick with this is that this is a style of sound where you can make it resemble the old school stuff, and I've done my level best to do that. But it also lends itself to how I do things, because the sound is extreme clarity, high voltage buses inside the thing, and a really clean signal path, and these really wide, broad frequency shaping. It's a movie sound. It's a sound that's designed to be played back really, really loud, and it can be shaped in myriad ways, but this is not the one that does the super thick, super glued kind of sound. This is one that will telegraph the musical intent right through the music. Whatever you've got, it will send it right through in a very clean and unprocessed way. And that could be real useful in a day when almost everything is all screwed up by overprocessing in a million different ways. So this one's the labor of love, more than perhaps any of the others. I say this, and I do still have some experiments that I could yet do. It's not going to be happening like immediately in 2024, but remember how Console MC had an issue that I had to put out some updates because there was a particular kind of processing that nobody else does, perhaps for this very reason, that was giving weird effects, thing that I call Subtight, and you can still download it as a plugin and use it directly. And Console MC used it as multiple high passes. ConsoleLA does a different thing with it. ConsoleLA does a thing where you've got that high pass on the bus, cleaning up the extreme lows so that it acts like it's a physical console that can only put out so much voltage. There's no digital lows coming out of this. And also hyping those highs in the way that Console MC does. But The channels do it reverse, much like the console processing. It's invertible. The channels are boosting the lows and cutting the highs just a tiny bit. And that's part of why the highs are capable of having such clarity and high voltage edge to them. But it also means that your lows coming through this system, and by that I'm not even meaning the Quad 8 system anymore. We're talking literally ConsoleLA. The lows sent through the ConsoleLA system will saturate and become more dense compared to if you weren't using it at all. There will be that additional boost, including way down in the subsonics, and then that will saturate a little tiny bit more than it otherwise might, giving you some harmonics that go through the entire system and come out the outside, meaning that ConsoleLA is probably able to articulate extreme lows, even if it is restricted from producing them as loudly as a raw DAW might. So you'll hear your subsonics maybe a little bit better because it's capable of throwing a few harmonics onto those extreme subsonic frequencies because they're being turned up going into the console summing stage, and then coming into the bus stage, we're cutting it back again and we're reversing the thing. If that sounds like a lot of hooey, well, it's just the way that I designed these things. And the answer is really whether you like the results. If you think I boost highs too much, give it a try and don't boost highs as much, and you might be just fine. And remember, I could always do things like on the channels, cut the bass and boost the highs going into the summing of, say, one that's designed to be the classic EMI red consoles, those tube consoles. And then on the bus, do the opposite, cut the highs back again, boost the lows, and we might be able to get into that realm where you can take 4 tracks and have it start sounding like Revolver or Sgt. Pepper's or the White Album. We'll see. More will be revealed. For now, enjoy ConsoleLA. Talk to you later.